All right, well, this is lesson 2 of biological effects of radiation. And so today we're talking about the type of damage that can be done when radiation interacts with a living thing. So we can break down the damage done into 3 distinct time frames. And so the time frames are not only the names, physical, chemical, and biological, but they also have an actual time that goes with them. And for your test, you need to know both the name, what happens at that stage, and the time that it takes place. So first you have a living thing like you, me, in the tree, and radiation impacts that person. What we're looking at right now mainly is external doses of radiation from a point source of ionizing radiation, like a radioactive irradiator, maybe a radiation generator for radiotherapy for cancer, or even a radioactive source. The first stage is the physical stage. This is where the radiation enters the living thing, and the radiation deposits energy. Excess energy removes an electron from an atom. In other words, it ionizes one of the atoms inside the living thing, and this happens very, very quickly. It's at 1 × 10⁻12 seconds. So this happens very, very quick, in about a trillionth of a second. During this physical stage, we're looking at an ionization. So you have radiation coming in and an electron being removed from an atom. The second stage takes place, also happens very, very quickly, and this is the chemical stage. This ionized atom typically will act as what we will call a free radical. Now, the big culprit in a human or in a living thing is the water, and so this comes in, an electron is removed, and now we have an unpaired electron. And if you have taken chemistry, an unpaired electron is the most reactive or most unstable arrangement of electron that you can have. And so this is very, very reactive. This electron will do anything it can to get paired back up again, and it will typically do so by carrying out a chemical reaction where it will bond with another electron to create that pair once again. And so we call these things, because they're kind of freakish, we call them a radical, and it's a free because it's an unpaired electron there. So we call these free radicals, and radicals are very reactive chemically. They're the most reactive chemical things that we know of. Free radicals are responsible for ozone depletion. They're responsible for lots of the types of reactions that take place in organic chemistry. The problem occurs is when these free radicals within a cell, and inside our cell is our DNA, when those free radicals start to damage DNA. A free radical inside your body itself, inside a cell, bouncing around, it might cause a chemical reaction that's unwanted, but more than likely it's not going to be too damaging. However, if it damages the DNA, ionizations to the DNA are going to be considered a bad thing. So the ionization that takes place in the physical stage could be of the DNA itself, or it could be in water, and then the water can damage DNA. But this is still pretty quick. This is 10 millionths of a second, so this is going to happen very, very quickly still as well. So in just the fraction of a second, energy is deposited, an ion is formed, and then that ion causes a chemical reaction to take place. So inside the cell, there's chromosomes. The chromosomes are filled with our DNA, and so this double helix that we have, this right here, is our DNA. And what we're mostly interested in are these base pairs. The base pairs there are what codes our DNA, and those base pairs can be flipped around, they can be broken and switched up, and that's when bad things start happening inside us. During the chemical stage, radiation, this is the physical right here. So the physical stage is radiation hitting the water right here. And from that water, these ionizations can take place and can produce things like hydrogen. It can produce a water with a negative charge. It can produce a peroxide, if you will. You can have H3Os. This is hydrogen peroxide. You have hydride, which is over here, which is also very, very reactive. Hydroxide, some of these you may have recognized from chemistry. Now the radiation can, right here and right here, damage the DNA directly. But since DNA is such a small target and water is so widespread within a living thing, especially in humans, interaction with water is much more likely. And in fact, we say that when you have more water in a living thing, they're more susceptible to radiation damage. Now the biological stage comes into play. The biological stage is when the cell that has been damaged tries to replicate what happens. It's only at that time that when the cell replicates that we actually know the extent of the biological damage. Now, if that cell never replicates, there's no biological damage. If the cell begins to replicate and dies, now the damage becomes evident, or something else could happen. The DNA could mutate. So you can have immediate death from DNA damage or from an irradiated cell. If the cell receives many, many, many radiations, there could be so many chemical reactions inside the cell just dies. That's not very common, actually. You have to get a very, very high dose in a very concentrated area of the body to kill lots and lots of cells. That's how radiotherapy works for cancer. If there's DNA damage, the DNA damage could lead to, with one O, could lead to death during the next division. It could lead to the prevention of division. The cell just doesn't divide, it becomes sterile, or a non-fatal mutation. So that, my friends, is cancer. Most non-fatal mutations are going to lead to either a cell that is non-functioning or an over-functioning cell, or a cell that is not doing what it's supposed to do, but it's still having some function. Okay, and so all of those things can bring about the different types of cancers that we see. But most of the time, interestingly enough, you have no effect. So most of the time, there's no damage whatsoever, even if the DNA gets damaged. Now remember, DNA replicates itself by basically unzipping down the middle, and then in one of the structures inside the cell, a copy is made and is stitched together here so that you end up having a new DNA strand. Changes within the DNA, there's 4 of them. You can have point changes. Actually, there's 5 of them here. You can have insertions, deletions, inversions, and translocations. So point changes is a single base is changed out. An insertion is an extra base, one that wasn't there before. A deletion obviously is a removal. An inversion means an entire section of DNA is flipped, it's reversed. And a translocation is 2 broken chromosome arms interchange, resulting in the fusion of different chromosomes. So these are all things that can happen when DNA gets damaged. Now, a single strand break or single strand breaks are breaks that only happen in one of the DNA strands. And when this happens, many times there's repair. So repair of a single strand break involves rejoining the adjoining DNA while using a complementary strand as a template. And this actually happens, but this is mainly caused by low linear energy transfer radiation at relatively low doses, and low LET is like gamma. Double strand breaks involve both DNA strands, and so repair is not very likely. When you have double strand breaks, the repair is much more complex, and typically the cell isn't going to be able to repair it correctly. This happens with high linear energy transfer radiation. This is going to be alpha. It's going to be the biggest culprit, but beta can actually do this as well. Or it can be high dose rates of gamma. So we can have both double strand and single strand breaks happening between either high doses of gamma or alpha or beta. If the DNA is repaired perfectly, there's no permanent effects, and in fact, you won't even know that it happened. The thing irradiated, the cell irradiated, would continue to function normally. DNA mutations can occur, and these cause abnormalities within the cells, and then this abnormality begins to multiply, and that's what we end up calling cancers. So if this happens, the cell sometimes can get destroyed by the immune system. The cell can survive and maintain the same function but reduced capacity. So if this was a large mass of cells within a functioning organ, the person might just have less function of that organ over time. The cell survives but is defective. It's a dysfunctional cell, and those are the kind that grow, and so that would create like a tumor, a mass of cells that aren't functioning correctly, and they might enter an irreversible state of dormancy where they're not doing anything whatsoever. So these are some outcomes of DNA damage. So what happens when cells are killed by radiation? So let's say you receive a high dose of radiation and a bunch of your cells start dying. What's going to happen? Well, it all depends on how many cells. If just a few are killed, the organism may not even know that it was received the radiation. It will heal itself and survive, and the lost cells will typically be replaced. This is actually what's happened with most of the people who have been gotten high doses from accidents. Most of them, the cells inside them died. They were replaced. They were tired for a time, sick for a time, but then they recovered. If more cells are killed, then the organism may survive but have deterministic effects appearing. They might always have reduced lung capacity, or they may have dysfunctioning parts of organs. They might have a scarring on their face or inside their cardiovascular system. So these things would cause problems throughout their life, and they would have reduced function, but they would still be alive. And then obviously, if you kill enough of the cells, those organisms would die. Damage to cells, there's 4 types of cell damage. There's somatic, genetic, direct, and indirect. And here's just a brief rundown of each one of these. Somatic damage is when the damage appears in the individual that's exposed. So the individual that's exposed has some sort of deterministic effect. They have reduced capacity to function normally. Genetic damage is when the damage is shown in the offspring of the irradiated or the exposed individual. So the individual may have no effects whatsoever, but then their children have some sort of a deterministic effect. There's a birth defect of some sort or some sort of issue that's caused by that. Direct damage is the damage done by the radiation directly. So that's, we said you had your DNA strand, and the radiation comes in and breaks the strand. So that's direct. And then indirect damage is typically when it interacts with water and causes this to become some sort of radical. And that radical then has a chemical reaction. So that's an indirect damage. So what's the big picture? Well, of all the cells of all these cell effects, they all revolve around cell division. So cells that do not divide, such as the brain, right? The brain cells don't divide very quickly, so therefore large doses of radiation to your head would probably cause you almost no damage. They're very resistant to radiation, whereas rapidly dividing cells, like in your GI tract, your blood, your skin, those are probably the 3 biggest. Those rapidly dividing cells are very susceptible to radiation. So if you were to get large doses to your skin would redden. It would probably boil like a blister from a sunburn. The GI tract is like your intestines, and then your blood, obviously, you would have a reduced capacity to uptake oxygen and to transport electrolytes through your body. So all of these things could give you an idea of some sort of damage done by this radiation. So that's kind of a rundown of how damage is done within the body itself. In our next lesson, we're going to talk about the different radiation syndromes from humans who are exposed and what types of symptoms they had and what that kind of looked like a little bit. So that'll be lesson 3. That'll post on Thursday. You do have an assignment that went along with this. Hopefully you were doing that assignment as you went. That posted this morning on Teams, and that is due Wednesday by midnight. So make sure to stay up on top of your work. Don't fall behind, guys. If you need anything, I'll be holding office hours tomorrow at noon, and I'll see you then. If not, then stay tuned for Thursday's lesson.